I've recently been looking at Afghanistan on the channel, from the Taliban and their offensive through to several of the other terrorist groups that are active in the country. And while I've been doing this, various NATO countries have been announcing whether they will or won't be talking with the new Taliban government and whether they will actually recognise them or not. This is a slight repeat of what happened in 1996 when the Taliban ruled the first time around, as they were only actually recognised internationally by 3 countries: Pakistan, somewhat unsurprisingly, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. The Taliban themselves said of their stance on foreign policy that the Taliban believe in non-interference in the affairs of other countries and similarly desire no outside interference in their country's internal affairs. They did also have a working relationship with Turkmenistan, largely to do with the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline and in terms of oil, but it was limited to just that. They also had somewhat friendly relations with their neighbour to the west, Iran, although this soured very quickly in 1998 when several Iranian diplomats were killed in Mazar-e Sharif. Another country with which the Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan had limited communication was China, and in 1999 China's foreign minister sent a delegation to talk with top Taliban officials in the country, owing largely to their alliance with their neighbour and the big funder of the Taliban, Pakistan, which was also one of the only countries to officially recognise it, although China never did officially recognise the Islamic Emirate itself. In 2000 as well, the Chinese ambassador to Pakistan actually became the only ambassador from a non-Muslim country who ever met with Mullah Omar, the secretive leader of the Taliban in Afghanistan. It's likely that Chinese officials already knew some members of the Taliban, as while it's now common knowledge that the CIA and the United States funded various mujahideen groups, some of which would later join or become the Taliban in Afghanistan during the war against the Soviets, it's less well known that China did the same. They armed, funded and trained various Afghan mujahideen militias to fight against the Soviets during their war in the 1980s. In 2001, during the American-led invasion of Afghanistan, China was officially part of the UN mission there and stated that it would uphold its objectives as long as it was held within the UN Charter for what they were doing there. China proved to be quite useful in dealing with Pakistan, as I mentioned, a long-time ally of China and an important power broker with it and the Afghan state. China's anti-Taliban stance seems to have changed around 2007 when a Chinese company won the rights to copper mines in Mes Aynak, just around 40 kilometers south of the capital Kabul. And it seems from this point onwards that China entered into negotiation and working together with not only the Afghan government, but also held talks with members of the Taliban, seeing it as an official body. One might say that the Chinese were playing realpolitik and seeing which side would come on top, having created a relationship with both just in case. In 2015, this seemed incredibly clear as there was a meeting held between Chinese officials and the Taliban in Urumqi, the capital of the province of Xinjiang, which is the area of China that borders Afghanistan through the Wakhan Corridor. On the 28th of July 2021, when the Taliban offensive was in full swing, a meeting was held in Tianjin between the representative of Xi Jinping's government, Wang Yi, and between a leading figure in the Taliban, who was Mullah Abdul Baradar, who was actually a co-founder of the Taliban movement and now looks to be the one to lead the new government. This was only weeks after Xi Jinping had also promised his continued support to the Afghan government. And on the 15th of August 2021, when the Islamic Emirate was declared and Kabul was captured by Taliban fighters, the Chinese blamed American and Allied incompetence for the defeat. So, what does China actually get out of having an alliance with the Taliban? Before answering this question, I'd like to quickly shout out today's video sponsor, which is Ground News. Now, when I was making this video, I had to go through a lot of different media reports, and the problem these days with a lot of media reports is that they all come from their own corner of bias, especially when talking about Afghanistan, China, and America. You can imagine that takes on the right and left wing, but also takes from different countries, are incredibly different, and it can make it really hard to find out, well, what's actually the truth here and what's just being spun. One way to get closer to that answer is to compare a lot of different reports that have been made about a similar topic, and one way you can do that is by looking at the Ground News app, which does just that. And you can do this by going down to the description and following the link, which is a bit easier. Or if you want to type, then you can type in ground.news/Hilbert, and you can get this app completely for free, which is what makes it even better. Please do go and check out Ground News because they really have helped me out when I'm making these videos, and they are an awesome sponsor to have. Part of the reason why China is interested in communicating with and remaining on good terms with this new Taliban government is because of the region of Xinjiang, which is the area in the very west of China that borders Afghanistan through the Wakhan Corridor. It's inhabited by a group of people called the Uyghur, which is a Muslim minority in the very west of China, which I talked about in this video, and whose relationship with the central Chinese state has not always been easy. And there are several separatist movements, one of which is the ETIM, also called the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, sometimes simply referred to as TIP, which is the Turkestan Islamic Party and seems to be a more modern name for the group. The group wants to establish an independent state away from China in what it calls East Turkestan, and has carried out several terrorist attacks in order to do so. Of course, having a Muslim minority in a larger non-Muslim country, a secular country such as China, has attracted the attention of Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda, as we all know, are closely allied with the Taliban and used Afghanistan as basis for operation against the United States. But what many people in the West don't know is that they also used Afghanistan as a base for probing attacks into China, and it has been rumored that there were Uyghur fighters from the East Turkestan Islamic Party that also fought alongside the Taliban in various operations. And in 1998, part of the reason why the Chinese started to open communication channels with the Taliban in Afghanistan at the time was because the headquarters of the Turkestan parties were moved to Kabul after a Chinese crackdown in Xinjiang. And in 2001, when the United States went to war and declared their war on terror, China hopped on the back of this and used it to crack down on what it saw as Islamist terror groups inside the region of Xinjiang, but which in actual fact simply allowed them to crack down more on Uyghur people and anyone of a dissenting voice against the central Chinese state and who wanted a separate or autonomous region in Turkestan, whether they were Islamists or not. The Taliban victory in Afghanistan is incredibly symbolic for Islamists around the world, as basically the plan of Al-Qaeda, which was to draw the United States and NATO into Afghanistan, fight a prolonged guerrilla war just as the Soviets did, and to defeat them, has now come off. And so we're hearing a lot of political agitation and in the media about the threat that these terrorist groups will now pose to the West and to the United States because of the success in Afghanistan. But by the same token, this also inspires those that have China as a target because of the situation in Xinjiang. And this is why I think that China is trying to communicate so much with the Taliban, because they want to ensure that the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, as they are now calling their state under their control, won't be a safe haven for Uyghur Islamist groups as it had been in the past. But this will force the Taliban into a somewhat tricky position, as Al-Qaeda, as the umbrella organization, has got several of these Uyghur Islamist groups under its wing and has promised several high officials in the Al-Qaeda movement have declared the jihad against China and the Chinese state as well. So the Taliban, who are the traditional allies of Al-Qaeda and who certainly still maintain links with them, will have to choose whether they will accept the deal of the Chinese to ignore these Uyghur groups and not to give them shelter, or whether they will continue to be the staunch Islamists they were in the 90s and to continue to back Al-Qaeda and the global jihad. Part of the answer has already been revealed, as Mullah Bahadur, the leader of the Taliban in the country, has already stated that he won't be supplying camps for any of the groups that mean China harm, specifically the TIP in this instance. He said that China is our most important partner and represents a fundamental and extraordinary opportunity for us, because it is ready to invest and rebuild our country on the 30th of August in an interview. This was said by Zabihullah Mujahid. the spokesman of the Taliban. And China in return is going to be investing money into the country as well as infrastructure and telecommunications, all things it desperately needs, especially because much of Afghanistan's reserves are being held. So the Taliban, who are now in control of the country, don't have access to the funds they need to sustain it, and the Afghan economy is currently doing a nosedive. There's also talk about Afghanistan now becoming part of the BRI, which is the shorthand for Belt and Road Initiative, particularly part of CPEC, which is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. This is something which would greatly boost Afghanistan's economy as well as playing into China's strategic aims. Furthermore, Afghanistan sits on a huge amount of mineral wealth, particularly in rare earth minerals, something which has sat under the ground and hasn't been accessed because of the years of war. It's certainly not something that the Taliban have the know-how and the equipment to extract as of yet. However, the Chinese certainly do. To find out a bit more about this, there's a great video by another channel looking at current events, Caspian Report, which I will link in a card and the description below. But suffice to say that China will be very important for this, and in fact in that same interview Mujahid said there are rich copper mines in the country which, thanks to the Chinese, can be put back into operation and modernized. In addition, China is our path to markets all over the world. Whether these plans come into fruition depends very much on how the next few months in Afghanistan play out. As I talked about in this video, there is currently what is basically a civil war going on in the Panjshir Valley, although how long this resistance will hold out is very much the question, and quite possibly by the time that I have uploaded this video, that resistance will largely be confined to small hit-and-run guerrilla attacks, as most of the valley has been taken over by the Taliban. However, if there is more insecurity throughout the country and other armed movements rise up, then the same problem that the Americans and the Afghan government had because of the Taliban will also haunt China and the Taliban government itself, as the instability will create conditions that aren't suitable for big business to come in and mining companies to start extracting these minerals for fear of being attacked by armed groups. So it very much depends on the Taliban themselves, how they decide to rule, whether or not they will be following Al-Qaeda's line and will continue to host international terrorist movements on their soil, or whether they decide to play a more economically sound game and to go with China to start extracting these earth minerals, and also how they treat the Afghan people and whether or not there will be more armed movements throughout the country. But for now, that is all that I know to say on this topic. I hope you've enjoyed it because it's come up in the news a few times, and obviously ground news is wink wink nudge nudge, very good for checking out the news and the bias from certain sides. But I thought it was an interesting topic to make a video about today, and I hope that you have found it interesting as well. I'll probably create a playlist of my videos for on Afghanistan, which I've been looking at a lot recently, but I think I'm going to move away from just making content on Afghanistan and the current situation, and to go back and look at some history as well as a few more videos, the 5-minute histories on various organizations and terrorist movements around the world, as well as some more old school history. But for now, I have been Hilbert, and this has been The History.